Hello and welcome to Exterro Inform. We are really glad you have joined. Exterro Inform is a full-day event which features 15 region-specific webinars led by industry experts. These sessions will dive into key challenges like collaborative forensics, cloud incident response, and insider threats. Some housekeeping rules for the webinar. Submit your questions anytime in the question window. If you would like to join the webinar after this one, simply stay online and you will be automatically directed to the next session. It is the same joining link for all the webinars today. The webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording with you in the next few days. I will now hand it over to the presenters. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Hargreaves. I have the privilege of being the moderator for this webinar today, and I'm going to be introducing our wonderful panel in just a moment. But the topic of this webinar is leading the way, and we're going to hear all about West Midlands Police's innovation with cloud-based digital forensics and digital crime scene triage. And I know that this is going to be a really fantastic opportunity for us to hear a lot about these things. Let me introduce you to our speakers. So first of all, we have John Price, Detective Sergeant at West Midlands Police. We have Tom Oldroyd, Director of Strategy and Sales at Semantics 21. And we also are joined by Jack Alloway, Managing Director at VSPL. And as you can see, I'm moderating this session, Sarah Hargreaves, and I look after the professional services team for forensics at Exterro. John, I'm going to hand over to you for us to start the conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So, hi everyone. As Sarah introduced, my name's John Price. I'm a Detective Sergeant in the West Midlands Police. I've been a police officer about 27 years. The vast majority of my career has been a detective, and probably around 15 years for me has been around in digital forensics. Our aim over the next 50 minutes is to talk around how West Midlands Police have worked with Exterro and other partners around moving a lot of our processing and review into the cloud. We'll give you an honest way around how it works, some of the pitfalls, some of the observations, some of the benefits. And as we're going through this as well, I'll talk to you around how we're also now using digital triage to address the sheer volumes of numbers and exhibits we've got coming into the department. So a little bit of history about West Midlands Police and digital forensics. So West Midlands Police, we also provide a forensic provision to Warwickshire Police. We cover a population of around 3.4 million residents. We have about 80 people employed within digital forensics. So the digital forensics here within the main lab in Birmingham, we have a team which we call SAT, which is our scene attendance team, our DAT, which is our data acquisition team, and DART, which is our data analysis and reporting team. So where we're based here, we mainly deal with phones, computers, going out to scenes, routers, network data, all that type of stuff. We don't do CCTV from this location here. We deal with around about 100 plus submissions per week into digital forensics. And year on year, we see that rising by about 10% each year on average. So there's a lot of work coming in. Also as well, we have about 150 terabytes of data, which comes in each week. And that's either acquisition, then to processing. And during the presentation, I'll explain which way we go with that. Either that goes, some of that may go into the cloud for fast premium storage for processing in the review solution, or it may get reviewed here, but then go off into archiving into the cloud.
So I was just about to say, John, as you were just talking on that, and I know that the topic of our conversation is your journey into the cloud. 150 terabytes, is that all in the cloud?
No, absolutely not. And I think what's really key here is people say, oh, you're pushing up that much data into the cloud. Absolutely not. So we have a hybrid solution here. So when the devices come in and they're acquired and they're processed, so before those go off either into a review tool or they go off to archiving, they'll go for like a data wash area where there'd be some indication from the scene attendance team to say during triage that was a positive for CSAM, child sexual abuse material. Or it could be, for example, it's going to go off to the reporting team. So we have about 4 petabytes on-prem to deal with the stuff. Once we know that becomes evidential from either the review tool or from our reporting team on site, that's when we'll move that over into the cloud, into archiving in the cloud, Sarah. So why did West Midlands Police move to the cloud, or to a review solution? So what we really found was our data sizes, as I've said, and this chart graph you've got in front of you, there's such an exponential growth, as we all know, from exhibits coming in. So around 70% of the cases we see within our department are around, unfortunately, around IOC, indecent images of children, or child sexual abuse material. And that number's only increasing. It's absolutely increasing as as we continue. So what we call Thrive, which is our threat, harm, and risk, we see a substantial growth in that. And what we decided was it's not acceptable just to be bringing more and more exhibits in, storing those on a shelf, and to be literally those stored on a shelf for 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 months, and with all that risk, all that safeguarding concerns, because we're not getting to those devices. So we realised we have to change the way we work in the lab, change the way we work around triage, and change the way we work around reviewing, and also cloud-based solutions for review and extra processing.
I think, John, that's quite interesting, because having worked in law enforcement, same as you as being a sergeant, those spikes that you're seeing here, I think, are replicated across the world. And I think it was only this week, you're probably aware, the UK government has published the new figures of the expected growth of CSAM investigations. I believe it's about 180% increase, which is a phenomenal increase of work that's going to be coming your way. So yeah, it is interesting to see your demand levels.
Absolutely, Tom, and obviously from your knowledge from previous law enforcement and where you work now, UK government's turn around saying 180% plus increase with that. Fundamentally, that work is going to end with digital forensics departments. Rightly so, but unfortunately, I don't think we have the luxury of sitting on that for months and months, either hoping we're going to outsource that risk or building more shelves. We have to take action now. From AI-generated CSAM, child sexual abuse material, from the social media, all those increases. We know, don't we, as professionals, that none of this technology is going away, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So it's finding, how do we leverage technology? How do we leverage partners to really sort of maximise those opportunities in there, really, Tom? So yeah, absolutely. So what was the issues with our process then that we had? So definitely within the United Kingdom, there's heavy regulation around ISO 17025 and also the Forensic Science Regulator. Now, within UK policing, digital forensics, it depends who you meet. There isn't, careful what I say, but there isn't really good press around ISO UCAS. A lot of people say it's a lot of work. I've got to be honest, I'm probably part of the exception that I think it's really good that we've got some control, some quality, some frameworks and standards that we're working to. When I go back, when I started in digital forensics in 2007, for example, when I started there, within a week or a month, I technically could have gone to court as an expert, and clearly nowhere near an expert. Whereas our current system processes, competency, validation, all that type of stuff that goes on in the background, we would never be there. So absolutely heavy governance around ISO accreditation and the Regulators Act. Also, OICs, investigators, access to available infrastructure to review product from DF. That is really key. So when I started in this team back in 2016, we were sending out, CDs. Then we went to DVDs. Then we went to dual-layer DVDs. Then we went to Blu-ray. And these data sizes that we're seeing are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're hardly sending Blu-rays out now. We're creating all these USBs that we're dropping these reports onto and shipping out. The problem we have is, and this problem is probably not unique to our force, is the workstations that these investigators or police officers are trying to review this data on. They could only be 8 gig or 16 gig of RAM, but we're then giving them a 50 gig USB or 100 gig USB to review the downloads, for example. And clearly it's causing so many issues and so many bottlenecks. So that's really key.
I think
Tom.
I think that's exactly what, again, we are seeing day in, day out across the world. It is this duplication of data. It's the high tech providing it back in a manner that's too old fashioned. It's not modernized. The poor frontline investigator really doesn't have the ability to play back those reports from phones and computers to understand what they're actually seeing. And I think it really does have an impact on the whole investigation workflow. And I think to a degree, all the hard work done by the digital forensic teams is kind of being lost when it gets to the investigator and not making its way into the court. And I think it's just because of the way we've historically handled evidence. As we know in the UK with MOPI rules, you really should only be making one copy of evidence. We shouldn't have multiple copies because obviously the loss of intelligence and sensitive material is greater by making those duplicates. So I think it's interesting. You've obviously done that research and you've found that as an issue with the as is process. It's also interesting to know what your sort of approach is around CADE, because again, with police forces that hand the data back to POLIT OCADE teams, you normally find the data doesn't come back, which then doesn't help with Project Vic or CADE and the way that's expanded, which again, I know that's something you've really taken into consideration.
Absolutely, Tom, and it's a really key point that you're saying there is, I think especially, I mean, there's two parts that you mentioned, but I think definitely the CADE one is, and I appreciate, I'm speaking on behalf of my own experiences here, and some forces may be different, but if we're chucking these discs out that contain CSAM, IOC, and police officers are reviewing them, if they've got no connections their side, for example, every image to me they're looking at should be treated as potentially first generation image, because unless that's gone through CADE or some form of database to say that child's been identified or the image has been seen before, you have that inherent risk of either A, missing safeguarding opportunities to safeguard a child or vulnerable person, or B, you could put a lot of effort into believing something's first generation, but it isn't because it's been seen before on CADE. And I think the problem we have with just sending discs or media out is unless you've got those live network connections back to a central source that can sanitize, check those hash values, check those images, check those videos, I think there's a lot of risk there, and also duplication of effort. But in the UK with CADE, for example, once we've done that grading, we've got to contribute that back into the CADE database, the child imagery, child abuse imagery database in the UK. So how do we push that back if the technology is not there? And so again, I'm not speaking on behalf of UK policing, but I don't think there's a lot of forces that take that into account if they're sending discs out. I think that's fair to say, Tom.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, I think it's that limitation. I don't think it's that there's not the drive that people want to work better. I think it's been that lack of IT and the knowledge and innovation. And I do think some forces may have got stifled with ISO and believe that was stopping them from changing and innovating the way that West Midlands Police has. But yeah, I definitely think it's something we have to go forward and push to make forensics and all policing a lot better. So yeah, no, exactly. I agree with you.
Thank you. So version control, validation of software viewers. We've had a couple of real, we've had not near miss, we've had a real serious issue with West Midlands Police back in 2019. In essence, a phone was recovered from a murder victim. The phone was in an AFU state after first unlock. We couldn't get into the phone because no one from the victim's family knew the PIN for the phone. AFU extraction was done, converted. That was put onto a disk with Cellbrite Reader. That went off to another team for them to review that. The other team that we had used the version of Cellbrite Reader on the laptop, not the version that was provided on the disk. They parsed that disk, looked at it, so there was absolutely nothing on it. A year later, case goes to trial. Thankfully, the defendants in this murder were convicted. But really, unfortunately for the family and reputation for WMP, the phone went back to the family a week after. The phone was looked at, and as we looked through the phone, or as the family put the SIM card into the phone, there was a Snapchat video, unfortunately, of the incident with their child. It was horrendous. That wasn't picked up. When we looked at the root cause of what caused that, was on the laptop that was getting used by that particular team. They were using an out-of-date version of Cellbrite Reader that wasn't configured, or never had the application level to see Snapchat. But if they used a Cellbrite Reader on the disk, they would have seen that. So we've got to be really careful that, we work with some really intelligent people in policing, absolutely amazing, but they're not technical experts. It doesn't, sometimes with them, if it's a different version, they're not going to know. And also, is it unfair to ask our staff to update software? So that version control of that software and validation to make sure we get repeatability of those results is really key. Duplication of effort from OIC is absolutely critical. This that we can send a disk out, for example, with a handset on. We can then have another disk out for another phone, and that can go to another team within that murder investigation, as an example. Few and far between we get computers or Macs, but we may get some. But it's single entities looking at that data, and what we were finding was people were sort of going, yeah, we found this link, and there was a lot of effort going in there. But if they looked at those symbolic links that were on the other phones, for example, they would have seen those links and made that mapping. A lot of that data was going to the analysts. The analysts are very, very, specialist professionals, but a lot of this data won't pass in their analyst tools. So there had to be a way of us combining all these different data sets for that cross-indexing of, phones, mobility devices, laptops, all that type of data that we get. So that was one of our key requirements. Within the United Kingdom, we're really heavily governed around Attorney General's guidance on disclosure, investigation management documents, disclosure managed documents. So much governance around. We can't just say we just want images. So what we have to provide is absolutely everything. There is a governance around that, around data protection notices, around what we can do with that data and how much we can ask for it. But in reality, it's part of the disclosure where it's reasonable proportionate, we have to give them everything. So we're really key around that openness around what we're providing, clearly to both the prosecution and the defence. Another key thing we have is our on-premises infrastructure. So when I took over the team with the infrastructure side back in 2016, if people said to me, we're going to be giving you X amount of money, you can go and build this new server rack in area and you can have this and you can have that. I was like a kid in the sweet shop. You're thinking, we got all this money, all this budget, and we can do all this. Wow, now, if someone says to me, do you want this? We'll go, no. What can we pass off to the IT teams, or what can we pass off to partners or partners in the cloud? It's just becoming phenomenal. We build more storage, then it's more racking, the electrical, the networking, the air conditioning, all that type of stuff, really. And it's also that sort of industry around information security skill sets and looking after that infrastructure. So digital forensics, clearly some very intelligent people working in technology, but it's not really our day job. We shouldn't be looking after this altogether. But then also, we don't want to hand all this over to our IT team in its entirety, because the IT team, under their ISO 27000 series, as an example, will have a totally different view to admin rights and all the rest of it that we need within networks. So I think it's really key we work with our partners on that. Jack, are you on the call? Is anything you want to say about that at all? So, sorry, folks.
I was just going to mention, actually, John, that in the absence of Jack being able to, I think he's having some connection issues. But I do know from when we've spoken before that you've got real value from working with companies like VSPL to deal with the fact that you really need to get some people in that really understand that infrastructure side on the information security side.
Absolutely. So, with DF, we wouldn't want to hand over total control, and our IT, for example, wouldn't want total control. And it's also working with those partners who've got that specialist knowledge in those areas, and it's finding those default lines. It does concern me a little bit within digital forensics, but my team, and I've seen it when I've gone on visits to other teams, where there's one or two people within a department, for example, and they're really key, absolutely key. But the problem is there's a real risk there to the organisation. If that person was to leave, then you're creating massive issues. So I think for those managers or those those stakeholders in that, is always understanding that if you're keeping a lot of this within DF and you're not using IT or you're not using your partners, there is those risks around that, really. So one of the reasons why we went to the review tool as well, and that comes onto that remote review for a lot of places where we worked, is, and it still happens for certain teams at the moment, but for the teams who are on the review tool now won't have this issue. But for other teams, for example, is the collection of disks or storage devices. So we would acquire, process, put all this data onto a storage device, and we would then send an email to the police officer. If it wasn't an in-custody case where there's real urgency within 24, 36 hours to get that person processed, and we would turn around and say, right, come and collect your jobs. Like I said, we've got quite a wide force area in the West Mids. From one area, so from one side of our police force to Warwickshire, for example, you're probably talking a 2-hour return journey. So those areas are quite key. It's also as well, the costs the officer or the investigator to travel over to us, to a central location to pick their data up. The vehicle costs, as daft as it sounds, to come across. Once you add all those costs together, they're quite key. When we were looking at the business case for a review tool around why did we want to remotely send our data off, part of that was back then we'd done just a brief snapshot of jobs that were waiting, and we had around 122 cases that were awaiting collection. So that was reported work. You're probably talking now for us back then, that was probably about 2 to 3 months worth of effort that we were waiting for officers to come and collect. If we were to outsource that work, for example, to a managed service provider out there, and they do some fantastic work, I think alone back then, I would say that work possibly cost around about 110,000 that hadn't been picked up.
It's interesting actually because that's the world that I've come from before I was at Exterro. I spent my whole career working in private labs, and there is a huge amount, especially mobile devices, that go out to these private labs, but there is that cost burden on the police force as well. And to look at the examples that you've given here, those numbers start to add up when these phones aren't being collected and pushed into the evidence cycle.
Absolutely, Sarah, and I won't. This is just generic costs and no particular. I'm not saying anything that we deal with outsourcing, but I would say nationally within the UK for a computer and a mobile phone job, going to an outsourcer for 8 hours of grading, you're probably talking about £1,800 per case. That's for 8 hours of one phone and one computer. If you turn that to 16 hours, I think they're charging between, and these are rough costs, between 2,800 to 3,000. So absolutely, outsourcing has a massive part to play, for policing in the UK to take that burden on. But I think when you look at those costs, are those costs sustainable constantly where we have to outsource to get this work through? Because those costs really do mount up on there. So one of the other big drivers within West Midlands Police was the HMIC, so His Majesty's Inspector of Constabularies. There was a big report done into digital forensics that was released back in December 22. And one of those recommendations was that they were encouraging forces to move over to cloud storage and cloud processing. And I think within the UK at the moment, I'm led to believe there's about 5 forces out of 43 that have started to move over from that recommendation. On the next slide, we'll start going into ethics and we'll start talking about the rights and the wrongs of going into the cloud. But I think for some forces, and the analogy I use is when people look at it and they go, just the ethical side of it, and you get past the ethics, is how do you eat an elephant? Because it's such a big, complex area around how do we get into the cloud? Do we trust the cloud? Do we trust the suppliers? Do we trust the technology? So there's so much wrapper around that. But I think the real big key piece is that ethics piece that we'll go on to now. So ethics, yeah. Absolutely. So before we started our cloud journey, there was a real thing from me, working with our IT and our information security departments. And they said to me going, oh, would you consider the cloud? And I was absolutely adamant, no. I was like, no, we need to be on-prem. Probably a lack of immaturity in me of understanding legislation and law at the time. But I was absolutely clear that we were going to keep this all on premises. Part of the planning process that we did to have the review tool with Exterro, unfortunately, a lot of this took part during COVID. So there was a lot of change of expectations. During COVID, we saw the issues around the supply chain with staff coming in. And that sort of changed our view a little bit around, can we solely just keep all our eggs in one basket with all this data and supporting this data held locally on-prem, for example. So before we went into any of this, there was a massive soul searching exercise around, is it right to put this horrendous material in the cloud? So under UK legislation around holding the data or sending the data, one of the defences is if it's for lawful policing purposes, an electronic copy can be made. So we went to our information security department and they were like, look, do you know what? If the adequate security wrappers are there, we're happy to support this. We then took that from our information security to our legal department. Our legal department went through it internally and they were like, we think this is okay to do. They then went down to separate chambers down in London to a barristers who then went over information security's view. They then went over the legal advice that we had from our force internally. And they also come back and said, there is nothing in the legislation to say you can't do this with the appropriate measures in place. So that was a bit of a game changer for our force, really. And it stopped some of that reluctance around the cloud.
John, if I can just jump in at this point, because, I think the word reluctance, I kind of really want, you've gone through a really rigorous legal process here to really make sure that the cloud is not only right for, from the point of view of the infrastructure, but also, the safety and protection of the data that's going to fall within there. But do you still think that this reluctance is a theme in policing and that there's that kind of a lot of unknown quantities? Because I know that, and I'm speaking a little bit for Jack here, but there's an awful lot of security wrappers that are placed into that cloud infrastructure.
Absolutely, and I think what's really key with that is I see people, when we're doing presentations over the last nearly 3 years of using this solution and stuff into the cloud, and I can see people looking at me going, are you really taking that risk? Are you really doing that? Probably the same face I had 3 years ago. Absolutely. And I totally get that. Before we brought this solution in, we had to go to our internal ethics committee and we had to turn around and say, look, this is what we want to do. And, clearly the questions there is what are the optics if the public get to know about this? And absolutely. So we had to be able to articulate that. But what we did say is, we want to hold true to our beliefs around looking after victims. And part of that is clearly, do we just keep having more and more exhibits in and building more and more shelves to put more and more exhibits on because we're afraid of expanding into new technologies securely? So that was really good. And that was we managed to articulate that to the ethics committee for them to go, yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully when I say this is there's a couple of us here who look after part of the digital forensics network. And as great as it's been that, organisationally, they've sent us on SANS courses, they've invested a lot in our training to look after this part of the DF network. We know where the issues are, if that makes sense, and understand where those risks are. And the honest question I say to people is, where's your data safer? West Midlands Police Digital Forensics or Microsoft Azure with all those controls, measures and all that stuff in place? So by any shadow of a doubt, I'm not saying what we're doing here is, not professional, but I think there's a lot more wrappers and a lot more security around us sending our data and auditing into Microsoft than there is with disks going out from this department. Tom, I know, obviously, semantics, you've moved with the Global Alliance database into the cloud. I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. It's exactly what would the public expect. They expect a quality police force who are modernised to tackle today's problems. And I think, yes, you can have a purely on-prem system, and some agencies will say, yes, it's 100% because it's air-gapped. But then, are you 100% safe because you're not receiving the latest updates from the software vendors? Can you actually scale to today's demand and tomorrow's demand? But at Semantics, we have to use the cloud. We're an AI company. We utilize AI processing using both Microsoft and Amazon's processors along with Google's. So we have to use state-of-the-art AI processors that are hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of processing a GPU, something you could not have or afford to do on-prem. The Global Alliance database, as you said, the huge increase we see with sex offences crimes, you cannot deal with it on your own. And we can have localized databases, national databases through Project Vic or CADE. But an investigator in West Midlands Police is doing exactly the same thing as an investigator in IEPD. or in the Brazilian police or German police. We have to work together. We have to be able to tackle this problem as one. We have to work with the big tech firms that are all online, but we have to do it sensibly. And I think it's important we have to make sure those security measures are in place. The cloud is the answer. It has to be, because it can scale at a cost that police forces can still afford, because I do believe on-prem will have its day. I do think the amount of storage needed, as we see more and more countries coming online and the volumes of data getting bigger. I've said it for many years. I was probably one of the early ones within policing, having come from a pharmaceuticals background, where we had billions of dollars of funding to push technology to its limits. Policing is catching up. And I think West Mids have really set that benchmark of this is one of the ways to go forward to deal with tomorrow's problems. So yeah, we as a company have been using it for a while. The database is huge. We can still use it on-prem, but you can use it as well online if you want to. It is GDPR compliant. We had to make sure it's all fully encrypted, not like other databases that may be only to be used offline. This is something, again, that's designed for tackling tomorrow's problems. So yeah, it's definitely the way forward. So yeah, I've seen many times people look and have that look of cloud, really. Can we trust it? And as you said, do you use the Microsoft or the Amazon experts where they have huge amounts of funding and knowledge, or do we rely on a local IT department within a police force? I think we would probably be better using the cloud solution.
John, can I just take you back to a point that you made before, actually, because whilst we're talking about cloud and we talk about reluctance and things, you did a huge amount of research and sort of the cost benefits and the efficiency benefits and things like that. But you mentioned MOPI in one of your previous slides, and I'm really interested to sort of hear your viewpoint and how you're handling the retention of this amount of data. You know, huge throughput of data going into the cloud, you know, and all of the management of that, because some of these cases have to be retained under MOPI for a very, very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So previous to 2018, when we had our centralized server storage, which was our first part of our journey, everything was going on to caddies. It was separate caddies, and it was a paper-based system of saying case 16 of 1, 2, 3, 4 is on caddy, and we all know those caddies have a certain life expectancy, and you know, are they going to spin back up if they've been sat there for 4 or 5 years? So in 2018, we moved with hardware provided by VSPL. That was centralized storage, where our cases would go and sit on our server storage. We would have an electronic system so we'd know where those cases were, and we used tape robots to then archive those cases off. So that was the first part of our MOPI journey, really. So at least we started to know really that where our data is, so we could account for it, and rightly so, especially when it's, you know, really sensitive personal data. When we moved to our archiving in the cloud and also used our fast premium, I'm not just saying this because it's fine, but absolute game changer for us, that everything that goes across now into the cloud has data tags attached to it. And those data tags for us are when the offence date occurred and also when that data come into DF. So we can literally account for every single bit of data that we've got. And that's for the MOPI, for the management of police information. So once it comes to a review, we can say, right, these cases can be reviewed. But also when it comes to deletion times, we have a legal delete processing of deleting twice and a soft delete of 30 days. You can change that whatever your cloud supplier is. But you can also automate that process as well. And there's conversations within our force at the moment around, do we automate the systems so once it hits that MOPI date, automatically deletes? So absolutely, you know, for the last 3 years, we've been able to account now for all of our data. Our previous systems before that, it was all paper-based, and it would have been quite a lot of work. And just to say where we are with our in the cloud, so clearly for Exterro, around the review tool, we're using Azure. We use Azure for our archiving piece, and we also use AWS for when we need assisted extra processing, and we can push out processing via AWS. So we're across both cloud platforms really, and we can see from there. But absolutely, I think that initial conversations, that initial journey of getting into the cloud can be quite hard. But I think once you get in there, the benefits are quite clear to be seen really. So yeah, so we talk about our review tool. So to everyone online, when you look at this, we're using version 7.6 at the moment within West Midlands Police, which was literally the original version from when we launched back in April 2022. Part of that reason why we stayed on there is just obviously, and I'll mention this later on in the presentation, around the training and that validation piece. But within the next couple of months, we will be moving to the latest version 8.2 and all the benefits that brings. We have slightly altered this slide to take some sensitive detail out. But the purpose of this slide is, so this is what we use, the front page, and this shows the cases that we've got. So I'm an admin and I can see the amount of cases in there. But what I wanted to show you was these sizes haven't been altered, is within our review tool solution, we've got cases from nearly 15.5 terabytes and looking on there down to nearly 180 gigabytes. So you can see that we're pushing a lot of data through this platform at the time. So it's not just a couple of gig, it's not just a couple of terabyte. I think those numbers there are quite impressive, really, around how we've put, larger cases into that, and it hasn't just been phones, for example.
And just to I know that your solution is very much a hybrid solution, and I know that you've worked very closely with the guys at VSPL to build that hybrid solution as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So it comes back onto that key point is, and this is me talking, and probably the cloud vendors don't want to hear this, but I'll be honest, I think it's too cost prohibitive to put all this original or your first acquired data straight into the cloud, into fast premium storage. Those budget controllers, you won't be the most popular person once they see those bills. But I think if there's some intelligence around how you're using that fast premium storage and how you can archive that off or putting cases into archive, you can clearly see the benefits around those capital costs and also those ongoing yearly revenue costs as well. So by moving this in, you can quite easily build up that business case for that, Sarah.
Thanks, John.
So, yeah, folks, what I'm not going to do here as part of this presentation is really start talking about this is part of the review tool and this is this, because I'm going to show you 7.6. It isn't the latest one at all. But what I do want to talk about is the integration. So if we go back to, I think it was the second or third slide, and Tom mentioned around CADE and how do we integrate with the child abuse imagery database. Previously in the organisation, massive risk that we would be sending discs out for our child protection teams. But with the use of a review platform, what that enables us to do is not only see what the officers have been looking at, so I can remotely log in, or my victim ID officer, for example, can log in and look at what the teams have been doing, just to give that peer review, that quality checking, just to make sure they're looking in those areas. Once they've done that grading, if we do it on discs, it goes nowhere. But with the review tool, what we've been able to do is work with Semantics and Exterro to enable us to get that data in that JSON with those images and with those videos and push back into CADE. Now, there's a specialist on here who's going to talk about JSONs and semantics. I'm not going to talk about it. So, Tom, I'll hand this over to you.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think that's really the key thing. I think as the companies are mature enough, we know that there is not going to be a single tool solution that is going to do the whole of digital forensics. And I think what West Midlands kind of have built here is this review platform, which is an amazing way of having that data central for people to review and get into. But they know that there's certain elements that they still needed to rely on us at Semantics 21. So at Semantics 21, we specialize in media review that is designed for CSAM-based investigations or counterterrorism-based investigations, where we try and leverage AI that is offline, is safe and secure for you to review data in a very, very quick way. And historically, having worked in policing, we all grew up with the idea of having media exported in a particular format, whether that be Project Vic with the JSON files. But times have changed and technology is changing. The way in which the tools needed to communicate with each other, we as vendors needed to actually start to work and partner with each other. And it's been really interesting working with both West Midlands Police and the team at Exterro to say, we can do this better. We have to keep innovating and changing. And we know that we aren't going to be the phone experts. We would recommend other tools for that. We know that online review, we're going to say use someone like Exterro. But we need to work together, and we can't have things locked into a single ecosystem because that doesn't really help our customers out. So working with the team at Exterro, we created dedicated exports that meant media could actually move from their product into our product incredibly quickly and very, very efficiently. So that when the media then comes to our products at Semantics 21, we can compare against our database, which is the world's largest database. It's 2.9 billion records, predominantly CSAM information. So we can cut down the review of material for media by about 50 to 70%. We can then also leverage the AI that we have for facial recognition, CSAM detection. We have the largest AI for detecting objects. Over 70,000 different objects, scenes, and emotions can be detected by the AI to allow you, the investigator, to find the evidence as quickly as possible. Even brand new state-of-the-art AI that no other forensic tool has, such as we can now look at any image to work out where was that image taken without the need of GPS. Originally designed for intelligence agencies to catch terrorists, but we now believe it was the right time to give that power to domestic police forces to help you find victims of other crimes or suspects that may be on the run. So by having the power to bring data from one tool to another, to leverage our performance and our powers and our strengths is brilliant. We can then help grow the database internally from our end. But the next steps are, okay, Exterro, what can we help you with next? Now, can we then provide the data back, which is the project we're currently working on now, is how do we get this data back into Exterro in the most efficient way or autonomously? And then can we also push that intelligence back to central databases such as CADE for the UK for the sex offences database here, and likewise for those that use Project Vic to also push the data back to Project Vic in a manner that would really mean that it's quicker than what we currently have today. So it's nice, and we're glad to be partnered with both West Midlands and Exterro, that we find this a really exciting time, and we want to make sure that as companies, we put our big boy pants on. We are not seen as competitors to each other. We want to provide you a solution that just works, and it needs to be efficient. So it's nice that Semantics have had this opportunity. We will continue to innovate. We will continue to work with all the different vendors. But we really have enjoyed working with the team at Exterro. They've been very open with us. And hopefully we've got some really exciting things that will make everyone's lives a lot easier. So, yeah, that's kind of where we like it. John hasn't taken West Midlands and gone with one just solution. We've managed to keep all the solutions together, and we can actually work as one through the different vendors. So, yeah, thank you, John, for involving us in the project. It is credit to you, the West Midlands team, for actually really pushing us to innovate new solutions. And again, with the Exterro team, it's great working with you guys.
Absolutely, likewise.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Tom. So yeah, so just briefly, really, I'll touch on this overall timeline. So, like I said before, sometimes people look at us and go, "Oh my God, you're moving into the cloud, and is there really much thought behind it?" So hopefully, this is just giving some assurance to people around the detail that we went into. I think for any cloud-based projects, it can't be delivered in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. There really does need to be a lot of planning. And from us, from the time we started our work stream 1, our initiation, to the time of delivery, April 2022, there was a lot of stuff in there. A lot of stuff around legal sign-off, the vetting of the partners that we're working with, the pen testing of the solution 365 into Azure, pen testing, DF networks, network upgrades, configuring those VMs, SQLs, all that type of stuff that goes on in the background. So, when I have a conversation with people, I think I'd bore them if I went through this overall timeline. But it's just to say there's a lot of work that goes on to get you there, really. And you're not going to do that alone in DF. You're not going to do that alone in information technology. We really have to bring our partners in and work with our partners to cross the line on this. So considerations, observations around bringing a review platform in, either that being on-prem or in the cloud. And this is my own personal journey. So I think we've got to be really key around understand what you're asking the vendors or the suppliers to provide.
Can you give us a bit more context in that, John? Can you give us a bit more of a deeper explanation of of where you've found, how that was, why it's a consideration on this slide, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I look back to when we started the original journey around the suppliers we're going to work with, part of the review tool journey, and it's fair to say for yourselves and the other supplier we was going to work with, for example, is we can say to you, right, we want a review tool and we want these police officers to see it, and we want to push all our data across. And I can imagine as a supplier for yourselves, must go, oh, yeah, this is fantastic. But there's a lot of meat on that journey that we really need to add, really, around what teams it going to, what data sizes are we looking at pushing across, what's the optimum times on the network, what are the considerations around CADE, for example. So I think what it's really important is you map out your journey, your processes yourself, then work with the vendors, not go to the vendors and do that together, because I think you can spend a disproportionate amount of time chasing your tails and stuff. That wasn't part of that original scope, Sarah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
So definitely a detailed benefit summary. So within our force, for example, we're very fortunate that there's a lot of investment around digital investigations. But with anything, it's right, we're going to give you something, but what are you going to give us back? And clearly, there's a lot of stuff around financial. So you're going to have this project. What are we going to cash back in? So, for example, is we can say, right, you'll have less police officers going over. So you're saving those hours of time, for example. And we worked out how many times police officers come over to our central location per day to collect discs. How many cars are on the road? What's the petrol of those cars, or fuel in those cars costing to get across? We went so granular into those details, property bags, property locations, and we brought all those costs in just to give that benefit summary to say these are the reasons why. I think triage. So yeah, triage, and more triage. So our force, we've had an uplift of 15 within our digital forensics for scene attendants, and we have an NFA triage rate of around 70%. So 70% of the items we triage aren't coming into this department. That is really key for us, because if we didn't triage, we would potentially put in 70% of that work back through the department, back onto more infrastructure or into the cloud. And that is costs that aren't proportionate. So for us, we do a lot of triaging before we get it there. It saves us a lot of time, identifies risk a lot quicker around live abuse, but also allows us to concentrate on those cases where we need to work. We had a pre-assessment from UCAS, which is the accreditation body, last May, and we're looking in April this year that UCAS are attending for accreditation for 17025 for digital scene attendants. So we'll be the first force in the UK to go for that. Clearly a lot of work to get there, but it's really worked really well for us. Business change impact assessments, same again, we've come across so many issues with this that we can't just roll out this solution to frontline investigators without proper training, understanding that simple things like when we thought the videos were going quite slow originally, that first year we're putting these videos in, and sometimes it worked fine, and then we'd add more and more users on, and then the video playback would go down, and we're going, oh, it's the workstations or it's the network, and we finally fault find that the VPN gateway we had when we originally set this up was like a 50 meg VPN gateway. Clearly it's that end-to-end process of looking at all those changes along that line, and clearly not forcing this upon staff and just saying grade your own work or review your own work. There has to be a big piece there, and hopefully we've learned a lot of lessons over that. As I've stated, early engagement with legal, information security, and IT departments. Without these on board, you're not going to be getting this past the line. Infrastructure upgrades. So with this, yeah, definitely, you'll need that appropriate level of bandwidth to, depends on how many people you want to get this remote review out to, for example. But if you change, as we know, you change your router, you're then going to be looking at, is the firewall sufficient? And are those switches coming back off that sufficient? So like for us, when we started looking, we was going, there's a 1 gig switch there, but we knew the demand, we need to replace it with a 10 gig switch. So it's understanding all those potential bottlenecks where you're putting that across, really. So I think finally on the benefits. So over the last 3 years, we've uploaded over 760 cases into the review tool of various different sizes. We've identified live abuse, first generation abuse, very quick with the review tool and people going through it. And even this morning, I was contacted around a job that one of the teams is using where live abuse was detected. As I say previously, those jobs would have been sitting on a shelf waiting for someone to pick that up with those increased SLAs, those service level agreements of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So outsourcing costs. Do we outsource within West Mids? Absolutely. But our costs are below the UK average for the size of a police force. Because the money's been invested into this, we can get these jobs out. And like I've stated earlier as well, literally reduction in the amount of exhibitor wait and examination because we're handing these out. So not only are we triaging a lot more, once these jobs are going out, it's less jobs on the shelves, which is helping us on our SLAs. So where we look at turning around on average between 90 days for a priority or 150 days for a standard. And we seem to be meeting that quite regular and significantly, not like every week it changes. There's quite a bit of time there to say we're quite static with those SLAs. If it's urgent on the review tool, as soon as that is acquired and it's pushed in, if it's an EO1, it'll have to be going acquired. It'll go into the review tool. It'll start processing on the fly, and we start getting the results back. If we've done the phone extraction, we load the phone extraction in, and as that starts going into the system, it starts processing on the fly. So as soon as that's landing in the system, clearly it's not giving us everything, but we're starting to see something. So clearly, those benefits around time in custody and safeguarding. So Tom, Sarah, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add at all.
I think one of the things I'd say, John, that's probably missing there is when we speak to your staff and some of the frontline investigators, is they're preferring the system. They're wanting to engage with this system, whereas historically they found digital evidence quite daunting. I think that's probably one of the things that's not there is the end user is happy to still use your services and to get the product back, and they feel that they're sort of empowered to do their job to the best of their ability. So I think that's is probably one of the benefits that is not as easy to quantify, but it definitely is something we've seen detected within your force.
Thanks,
on that
Tom.
point, Tom. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say. Sorry, we were. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry, just to go back to that, Tom. I think it's a really key point that learning that original journey. I think one of the takeaways from this is we've got to take the staff on the journey better so they understand what's asking of them. But I can remember probably about a year ago there was a member of staff on a particular team who didn't like using the review tool. Wasn't for them, and they didn't believe they should be using it. That subsequent person moves team to another team who can't use the review tool, who have to wait for discs. And the joy it gave me when he sent me an email saying, "Can you drop my job onto the review tool, please? Because it's a lot quicker." So when he was on the original team where the review tool was going into, he wasn't, the best placed person to want to use it. And as soon as he leaves and he goes back to the old way of working, he wants his cases in the review tool so we can get them a lot quicker. Sorry, Sarah, back to you.
No, thanks, John. And I think it was just to talk about the point that Tom made. We also, not only are the users happy about this, but what we're also seeing is that we're able to get almost the right people on the right part of the job, because whilst our forensic teams in the forces are absolutely wonderful, massively skilled people, it's all of that exposure that the officers have got from the point of view of looking at imagery and identifying people that maybe the forensic team wouldn't identify. Maybe it's an association, or maybe it's something like that. So I think that it's the right eyes on the right part of the job, and I think that that's really beneficial and really supports victim ID and stuff like that. I think the real key theme for me, the key takeaway for me, and I giggled a little when you said, "How do you eat an elephant?" But this really was a massive project. And what's clear is this has been achieved not only through a very broad analysis that you did with your team and a really well put together business case, but also it's that collaboration. It's a privilege to work with you and VSP and Semantics 21, but it's very much about that collaborative effort. And I think that's what that's something that, to me, if others were wanting to sort of do something similar to you, I think it's about having that collaboration with the vendors, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like you're saying, it's working with those suppliers. It's all about that security of information, all that pen testing, all that legal governance, and that continuous validation audits to make sure the data's safe and we're doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I need to interrupt now because we are going to have another webinar in just 5 minutes, and we are using the same platform. So
no problem, Lisa.
For that. On behalf of Exterro Marketing, thank you so much to attending this webinar, and to you, John Price, to Jack Alloway, Tom Oldroyd, to Sarah Hargreaves, to have that wonderful conversation. we would love to continue it. And I see it was very vivid. I'm really sorry to jump in like that. But else you will be cut from the system because our next webinar will be starting. So we don't want that either. So the next session is going to be in Spanish. It's going, I'll read out the title in English. It's Securing Digital Evidence, Building a Robust Framework for Cybersecurity and Compliance in Forensics. It will be held by Fidel Delgado from Grant Thornton and Henry Mata from EY Latam. So if you want to join that webinar, you can just stay online. You will be directed exactly directly to the other webinar. And also, we wanted to let you know that as we have many sessions today, you can even listen into other webinars until 11 p.m. set or 10 p.m. British time tonight, because we will have sessions from the US. There will be 6 different sessions from the US, also live. So you would just have to use the same link and you'll be able to listen to those as well.
Thank you, Lillian.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a good day.